Polly Galtieri is the sort of character television pretends it can mass produce. A loud suit, a permanent scowl, a few superstitions, and the emotional depth of a parking meter. Until the series quietly reveals that the one-dimensional goon routine was never the whole job description. For roughly the first 2 seasons, the presentation is straightforward. An archetypal mob soldier with a twitchy, eccentric edge, engineered to deliver menace and punchlines on demand. Then, the story keeps going, inconveniently for anyone who prefers their characters pre-labeled, and Polly becomes the hub of an alarming number of consequential plotlines. Tension with Christopher, being played by Johnny Sack while simultaneously trying to play both sides by ingratiating himself with New York, and the broader implications of that private duplicity for the Soprano crew, including the fallout surrounding the Ginny Sack situation. The longer the series runs, the more Polly's life stops resembling a caricature and starts resembling the grim ecosystem that produces people like him. Fiercely status conscious, perpetually insecure, capable of warmth when it flatters his self-image, and capable of cruelty when it protects it. That development is not a sentimental, hidden heart reveal. It is something colder and more interesting. The gradual confirmation that the comedic exterior is a working disguise, even when the character is not consciously performing it. The most revealing material is not the gunplay or the chest thumping. It is the domestic unraveling. The relationship with the woman he believes is his mother, the identity shock that reorders his loyalties overnight, and the way he punishes the wrong person because rage is easier than grief. Few things expose a person's moral architecture faster than learning a parent is not biologically related. And Polly's response is not confusion, not reflection, not tenderness toward the person who raised him, but a petty, vindictive withdrawal that plays like a case study in emotional immaturity. The damage is not collateral, it is the point. An adult who was loved, fed, protected, and shaped chooses, in effect, to litigate the entire bond because genetics did not comply with his ego. The scene is not merely sad, it is instructive. It clarifies that Polly's attachments are conditional, transactional, and easily weaponized, which makes every later profession of loyalty read as what it usually is, a sales pitch. And yet the series is shrewd enough to keep him compelling while making him repellent, which is where performance becomes decisive. Tony Sirico's work is the reason Polly doesn't read like a bundle of traits stapled to a tracksuit. The character registers as startlingly transparent to the audience, if not to the people trapped in his world, because his reactions land as lived in rather than staged. When certain characters explode, the viewer can admire the technique. When Polly explodes, the viewer believes the explosion. The anger, the sulking, the scheming, the sudden vulnerability, the defensive bravado, none of it feels like a performer demonstrating emotion for the camera. It feels like a man who has spent his life confusing intimidation for strength, and is periodically shocked to discover that it does not anesthetize fear. That is why Polly can swing from friendly to threatening in a breath without seeming inconsistent. It is consistent, just not flattering. He is, in many respects, one of the most overtly emotive figures in the show outside Tony himself. Aggressive and borderline sociopathic one moment, oddly warm when conditions reward it, deeply fragile when his standing is threatened, rock-solid loyal when loyalty is profitable, and quietly untrustworthy when survival requires an exit plan. If that reads like too many faces for one person, that is only because fiction often sanitizes people into a single dominant note. Polly is the reminder that real personalities are messy, contradictory, and frequently unpleasant. A particularly sharp demonstration of this blend of comedy, cruelty, and insecurity arrives in Christopher's intervention sequence, where Sirico's reaction shots and line deliveries do more character work than whole speeches elsewhere. There is a specific look, triggered by Adriana's remark about Christopher's sexual dysfunction, that has achieved the status of a small legend, because it condenses Polly's entire psychic operating system into a few seconds. Shock, judgment, juvenile delight, moral outrage deployed as theater, and the ever-present hunger to dominate the room. The subsequent speech lands not because it is eloquent, but because it is perfectly calibrated to Polly's idea of righteousness, performative, punitive, and somehow self-congratulatory. The irony, of course, is that this is also why he is funny. The humor is not nice, it is parasitic. Polly's comedic appeal comes from watching a man treat every social situation as a contest he must win, even when the prize is only the satisfaction of having humiliated someone who cannot safely respond. The show repeatedly underlines that this charm is a viewer-side phenomenon, not an in-world one. Other characters are routinely annoyed by him. Overseas, strangers who barely know him mock or dismiss him. Tony's patience with him erodes into thinly veiled contempt. Christopher's relationship with him is a long-running feud. And the claim that he compensates by being a top-tier earner is, at best, generous. The inescapable conclusion is that Polly is likable largely because the camera makes him entertaining. Living near him would be exhausting in any setting, criminal or otherwise. Even his interactions with service staff sketch an ugly consistency. The snapping, the entitlement, the casual threats, the reflex to treat below him as a category rather than a human being. These aren't isolated lapses, they are the character. The broader moral ledger is worse. He gossips like a bored courtier, leaks information when it benefits him, and flirts with betrayal under the guise of keeping options open, including actively feeling out Johnny Sack while Tony is incarcerated, building a safety net behind his own boss's back. He is willing to turn on anyone at any time. He simply prefers to do it without being caught. He also commits acts that cross from criminal into gratuitously cruel, and the series never lets the audience pretend otherwise. He kills, he intimidates, he humiliates. He indulges personal fixations that are both invasive and disgusting, and he performs indignation as a substitute for ethics. If there is a case to be made that he is among the worst people in the series, it is not difficult to assemble. What complicates the case is that the show surrounds him with competition for that title. Figures whose villainy is more overt, theatrical, or baroque. So Polly's ugliness can hide behind his clownishness. That does not absolve it. It simply makes it easier to swallow. In fact, one of the sharper assessments is precisely that. Polly's goofiness functions as camouflage for behavior that is, in aggregate, horrific, with a body count and cruelty quotient that can rival or exceed flashier monsters. And because he survives, the series also toys with that old aphorism about beware of old men in a profession where men die young. The temptation is to frame him as a cautionary legend, an aging soldier whose longevity signals a special kind of lethality. But the show complicates this too. There are plenty of older men in that world who reach advanced age, so longevity alone is not a mystical endorsement. It can just as easily be the product of luck, timing, bureaucracy, or cautious selfishness. The more persuasive explanation is tactical. Polly is exceptionally good at making himself useful to the boss without becoming a lightning rod. When Tony complains about someone, Polly immediately reminds him how easy it would be to eliminate the problem, less a strategic contribution than a declaration of availability, a standing offer to commit violence as proof of devotion. It is the behavior of a man who wants credit for loyalty while simultaneously ensuring he is never excluded from the next round of favor. He also tends to avoid the most dangerous visibility, staying out of certain high-level meetings, letting others take the spotlight, and positioning himself above the most disposable underlings, but below the kind of rank that attracts the worst attention. This is not genius in an academic sense, and the character is routinely presented as intellectually limited. It is street intelligence, the kind that recognizes wind direction and moves with it. That is also why he reads as a two-faced snake. He can be first in line to throw a punch, and other mobsters can fear him, while he still spends his off hours calculating who might provide shelter if the current house catches fire. He gets the life in the bleakest way. He understands that loyalty is rhetoric, survival is the real doctrine, and romance is for people who do not have to think in exit routes. Appropriately, he is famously single, like another old survivor in that orbit. The show practically invites the conclusion that solitude is not a personality quirk, but a tactical advantage. A family is leverage. Attachments are liabilities. The price, predictably, is that when these men are remembered, it is rarely as anything but a set of petty tyrannies and wasted years, an obituary written in half-empty rooms and grudges. And because this is The Sopranos, the survival is not framed as triumph. It is framed as a kind of long, corrosive punishment, the cockroach principle, not the hero's journey. That survival, notably, has fueled an enduring interpretation of the series' end in which Polly's instinct for self-preservation escalates into outright complicity, specifically that Tony is killed and Polly is involved in the setup, possibly alongside Patsy, with the members-only figure functioning as hired muscle. This reading is not presented as settled fact, but it persists because it harmonizes with the character's established pattern. Profess loyalty loudly, betray quietly, and always ensure there is a chair to land in when the music stops. It also fits the colder view of Polly as the biggest sociopath in the crew, not because he is the most flamboyantly sadistic, but because he is the most relentlessly self-interested, the least capable of moral growth, and the most likely to treat the lives around him as expendable inputs to his own continued comfort. The fact that this same figure can also be genuinely hilarious is not a contradiction. It is the series' thesis about charisma and rot. This is also where performance comparisons become revealing. Sirico's authenticity, whether the result of deliberate nuance, instinct, or something uncomfortably close to self-portraiture, often reads more real than actors whose work is visibly crafted. Some characters, even when excellent, can feel like demonstrations of acting. Polly often feels like an organism reacting. That is why he can be considered better than certain limited performers in the cast, and why another actor with a similar naturalism, such as the one portraying Larry Baris, can be cited as having that same unforced credibility. By contrast, a performer like Steven Van Zandt, in the role of Silvio, succeeds precisely through stylization. The character is exaggerated, mannered, and theatrical, and the performance works because the exaggeration is the point. Trouble starts when a different production tries to reproduce that exaggeration outside its native habitat. The prequel film's handling of timeline and characterization issues, especially around age continuity, provides a masterclass in how to provoke audience irritation without gaining anything in return. The basic arithmetic is the problem, and it is not subtle. If Tony is roughly 40 when the series begins in 1999, the implied birth year lands around 1959. When the film jumps into the 1970s, Tony should therefore be around 12 or 13, yet the portrayal leans older, more like mid-teens. That alone might be survivable as casting drift, except the film compounds it by presenting Silvio as an adult, already functioning as a meaningful figure in the family, while established series dialogue and supplementary canon imply that Silvio and Tony were near contemporaries. Ralph Cifaretto's Mickey Mouse Crew story places Tony, Silvio, Jackie, and Ralph in the same youth cohort. Series references recall Tony and Silvio as kids peeking into the executive game together, and official companion material has Silvio's birth year close enough to Tony's that the age gap should not resemble a generational divide. Yet the film depicts Silvio as the sort of grown man who orders Polly and Pussy around, implying a hierarchy and seniority that clashes with the show's internal history, particularly given that Polly is repeatedly framed as someone who predates Silvio in the family, not the other way around. The more fans try to hand-wave this into coherence, suggesting Silvio is perhaps 10 years older, or that he served as an older mentor advising younger kids how to rob games, the more the portrayal strains plausibility, especially when the visual depiction gives him a mature comb-over and a level of embedded authority that would, if taken literally, age him into retirement territory by the time the series ends. And then there is the aesthetic choice of young Silvio, which lands less like an origin story and more like a parody of Van Zant's already heightened original. The impression is competent as mimicry, but miscalibrated for a younger man. What feels like stylized eccentricity in the series becomes cartoonish in the prequel, as if the character were reduced to a bundle of tics and hairline jokes. That hairline fixation, in particular, reads like a lazy answer to a question no one asked. Rather than explore the crew as an actual little crew in its formative years, first cigarettes, first petty crimes, first weapons, the writing practically composing itself, the film trades that potential for the spectacle of grown men repeating nicknames and strutting through scenes as if cosplay were character. The complaint is not simply that the timeline is off. It is that it is off for no advantage. There were countless compelling figures whose prime years could have been dramatized without breaking continuity. Family associates, uncles, elders, forgotten threats. Yet the film chooses the least rewarding path. It disrupts established chronology, diminishes the interest of youth dynamics, and offers nothing in exchange but distracting inconsistencies. It even introduces secondary age oddities, such as sibling age spacing, that feels wrong on its face, undermining the sense of lived family history. And then, to elevate the provocation into genuine sabotage, the film leans on an overwrought voiceover that repeatedly undercuts suspense, most egregiously by spoiling a major revelation tied to the final season, thereby robbing new viewers of discovery. Voiceover is not inherently flawed. It is simply difficult. Here, it functions as an unforced error, conspicuous, heavy-handed, and oddly indifferent to the experience of anyone approaching the story fresh. That indifference toward coherence and viewer investment is why some conclude the film cannot be treated as a direct prequel at all, but rather as a loosely related spin-off, borrowing familiar names while diverging sharply in quality and care. Even defenders who concede it is not entirely bad tend to do so by reframing it as set in the universe, rather than a strict continuation. An odd defense, given that the series' universe is not a fantasy realm requiring lore patches. It is recognizably the real world, which makes alternate continuity feel less like artistic license and more like avoidable sloppiness. If the creator himself acknowledges plot holes, the audience is not obligated to perform intellectual gymnastics to pretend they are features. The film's failures also ripple back into discussions of performance and authenticity in the series, particularly around Sirico. There is a persistent tendency to dismiss him as someone playing himself, as though the only way a man with a criminal past could excel on screen is by accidentally wandering into the right lighting. That assumption is not merely lazy, it is an insult disguised as analysis. Sirico's public demeanor outside the role, measured, articulate, deliberate, does not map neatly onto Polly's volatility, suggesting intention, craft, and control. More broadly, acting quality is not reducible to range as the only metric worth scoring. Some actors transform radically across roles. Others master a narrower band with extraordinary timing, specificity, and truthfulness. A performer like Kevin Bacon can slide between moral poles, even rendering reprehensible characters with uncomfortable humanity. A character actor like Paul Giamatti can inhabit a distinctive register with exceptional richness. Sirico belongs to this latter tradition, delivering menace and comedy with precision, while anchoring the character's emotional volatility in something that feels painfully real. That does not make him limited in the pejorative sense. It makes him expertly deployed. And there are other cast members who hint at broader versatility. Dan Grimaldi, for instance, convincingly embodying a feared gangster, despite an outward profile that suggests he could just as easily play a professor, a lawyer, or any number of roles without strain, while others are more tightly typecast by presence. This is not a hierarchy of good and bad actors, so much as a reminder that screen credibility has multiple currencies. Sirico's currency is immediacy, the sense that the character is not being performed at the viewer, but existing in spite of the viewer. That credibility also informs smaller, stranger readings that orbit Polly, such as the claim that the character is secretly gay, supposedly detectable in slowed-down footage from a scene involving Christopher being checked for a wire. Taken literally, that assertion is speculative at best and wishful at worst. Taken as a symptom, it is more revealing of the character's ambiguous relationship to masculinity and performance. Polly polices sexuality loudly, erupts in crude homophobia, and treats deviance as both joke and threat. Behavior that can function as simple bigotry, as status signaling, or as defensive overcompensation. The point is not to settle the diagnosis, but to note the pattern. Insecurity disguised as certainty, fragility disguised as aggression, fear disguised as contempt. Which, again, returns to the same conclusion. Polly is complex, not because he secretly harbors a noble soul, but because he is a rotating prism of appetites and anxieties, held together by a lifelong devotion to saving his own skin. He is careful about appearances, even in the mundane. Posture, grooming, and physical upkeep contribute to the perception of youthfulness, and the series even underscores fitness behaviors on screen. That attention to maintenance aligns with his broader obsession with control of image, of hierarchy, of narrative. In a world where inattentiveness gets people killed, the ones who survive are rarely the slow and the sentimental. Polly survives because he is alert, opportunistic, and shamelessly adaptive. That does not make him admirable, it makes him effective. And the show's cruel joke is that effectiveness is often rewarded with longevity, not happiness. The final accounting, then, is not that Polly is an underappreciated hero or a misunderstood eccentric. He is a brilliantly rendered portrait of a small, vicious man who can be charming for exactly as long as it takes to forget what he is. The audience laughs because the lines are sharp and the reactions are priceless. Then the laughter catches in the throat, because the same man who delivers comedy also destroys people, betrays trust, humiliates the vulnerable, and treats love as an inconvenience. The series does not ask for sympathy, it offers clarity. The character looks are deceiving only in the sense that the loud, funny exterior distracts from the more damning truth underneath. The greatest trick Polly ever pulls is convincing anyone, viewer or colleague, that his loyalty, his decency, or his humanity is anything more than a temporary mood.